August 9th, 1945. Over the shattered remains of Nagasaki, a single mushroom cloud still clawed at the heavens. Below, the city was gone. Tens of thousands vanished in a heartbeat. The world had just witnessed the second atomic bomb in human history. But what almost nobody knew was that a third one was already waiting, loaded, assembled, and nearly ready to fly. If fate had shifted by just a few days, another Japanese city would have disappeared. The war might have ended differently. The world might have entered a darker age, one bomb at a time. Before we dive deeper into this incredible true story, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the untold human stories of World War II. By August 10th, America was already preparing its next atomic strike. In a quiet desert in New Mexico, technicians were assembling the core, a deadly sphere of plutonium codenamed Fat Man No. 2. Its name was ordinary, its purpose anything but. The first bomb, Little Boy, had destroyed Hiroshima on August 6th. The second, Fat Man, obliterated Nagasaki on August 9th. Both were designed to break Japan's will, to force surrender before a costly Allied invasion. But inside the U.S. War Department, the momentum didn't stop. President Harry Truman, General Leslie Groves, and the Manhattan Project scientists were already discussing the third strike. They believed Japan might still refuse to surrender. Intelligence reports hinted that parts of the Imperial Army were preparing to fight to the last man, even if it meant national suicide. So the unthinkable became the next step. A third atomic bomb, identical in design to the Nagasaki weapon, was being prepared to launch before August 20th. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Pacific, Japan's leaders were arguing inside underground bunkers in Tokyo. The emperor wanted peace. His generals wanted honor, even in annihilation. The clock was ticking. Each sunrise brought them closer to a decision or another mushroom cloud. Back at Los Alamos, a young physicist named Philip Morrison wrote in his notebook, "We have another core. If the war does not end, it will be ready within 10 days. 10 days, until the world saw a third sun rise over Japan." But where would it fall? That question was already being debated in Washington. Some targets were still untouched: Kyoto, Niigata, even Tokyo itself. Each name represented thousands of lives, and the final warning to a nation already burning. Yet one man, sitting in the Oval Office, had the power to stop it. And Harry Truman was about to make the hardest decision of his presidency. On August 10th, as smoke still drifted from Nagasaki's ruins, a telegram arrived at the White House. It was from Tokyo. The Japanese government was finally ready to talk about surrender, but with one condition: they wanted to keep their emperor. Truman hesitated. His generals wanted unconditional surrender, no exceptions. His scientists wanted to test the next bomb, to see what it could do. But time was running out. In a small warehouse at Wendover Airfield, Utah, engineers were already fitting another B-29 bomber with new wiring and bomb release systems. The mission name was Operation Centerboard 3. If Japan delayed even a few more days, this bomber would take off, and the third atomic bomb would change history again. Harry Truman sat in the Oval Office, staring at a single sheet of paper. It was a telegram from Tokyo, polite, cautious and desperate. Japan was asking to surrender, but on one condition: the Emperor must remain. Truman leaned back in his chair, the room dim except for the glow of a desk lamp. Around him stood his top advisors: Secretary of State James Burns, General George Marshall, and Secretary of War Henry Stimson. Each man had a different answer. Burns wanted no mercy. Marshall, weary from years of war, wanted it over, but only with Japan's total submission. And Stimson, his voice trembling, reminded them of what another bomb would mean. "Mr. President, it would be slaughter, pure slaughter." Outside, the world didn't know how close it was to another nuclear blast. In New Mexico, scientists were still working in shifts around the clock. The third plutonium core, the same kind used in Nagasaki, sat locked inside a metal safe at Los Alamos. To them, it was just another experiment, another step in science. But for the men loading crates onto planes in Utah, it was death in a steel shell. The weapon was set to be ready by August 17th. The plan: deliver it to Tinian Island, the same base from which the first 2 atomic missions had launched. The man overseeing it all was General Leslie Groves, commander of the Manhattan Project. Gruff, tireless, and ruthless when it came to deadlines. He sent a message to his deputy: prepare the next unit for shipment, authorization pending from Washington. Authorization pending. Those 2 words meant everything. Because while the scientists worked and the pilots trained, Japan was collapsing from within. In Tokyo, air raid sirens no longer mattered. Entire neighborhoods were already ash. The people were starving, the trains barely running. Yet within the imperial palace, the debate raged on. Should they fight or surrender? Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki faced his war cabinet, each man red-eyed from exhaustion. General Anami, the Minister of War, slammed his fist on the table. If we surrender, Japan dies. Better to fight with bamboo spears than bow to the Americans. But others whispered of the bombs: Hiroshima, Nagasaki, cities gone in seconds. Survivors walking like ghosts, their skin hanging like burnt paper. Even the most loyal soldiers trembled at what might come next. And still, no one knew about the third bomb. On August 11th, in the skies over the Pacific, the 509th Composite Group, the elite B-29 squadron trained for atomic missions, began new briefings. One of the pilots, Major Charles Sweeney, who had dropped the Nagasaki bomb, recalled later, "We were told to stand by for another operation. They didn't tell us the target. They just said, be ready." That target was likely Tokyo or Niigata, depending on weather conditions and resistance levels. The message was clear. If Japan didn't surrender by August 17th, the next bomb would fall. Meanwhile, in Los Alamos, one man carried the weight of it all: Robert Oppenheimer, the scientific director. After seeing the devastation of Hiroshima, he was shaken. When reporters asked him how he felt, he whispered words from the Bhagavad Gita: "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." But there was still another core waiting, another chance to destroy another world. By August 12th, Oppenheimer wrote in his notes, "The third device could be ready by the 17th or 18th, all components available." The system was moving, step by step, toward another detonation. And in Washington, Truman knew it. He had seen the photos from Nagasaki. Twisted bodies, melted stone, cities vaporized. His advisors urged him to continue the strikes until Japan surrendered unconditionally. But deep down, something in Truman began to shift. He called his Secretary of Commerce, Henry Wallace, and said quietly, "I can't see killing another 100,000 people. The decision now is in their hands." Still, no one in the military stopped preparing. At Wendover Field, technicians tested the bomb racks again. The plutonium core sat in Los Alamos, guarded by soldiers who didn't even know what they were guarding. In Tinian, empty bomb casings waited in hangars under tarps, marked only with a single symbol, a small black triangle. The machinery of destruction was in motion, waiting only for one word from the president. But in Japan, something was stirring too. Deep within the imperial palace, Emperor Hirohito himself was about to speak, not to his generals, but to history. The question was, would his voice reach the world before the next bomb fell?
The night of August 14, 1945, Tokyo was a city of whispers and smoke. The emperor's decision had been made. Japan would surrender. But not everyone agreed. Inside the imperial palace, a secret group of officers plotted to overthrow the government before dawn. They called it the Kyujo Incident, a coup to stop surrender and save Japan's honor. Lieutenant Colonel Masataka Ida and a handful of young army officers believed that surrendering would shame their ancestors. They gathered weapons, seized parts of the palace, and tried to destroy the recording of the emperor's surrender speech, the one meant to be broadcast the next morning. That fragile voice, locked in a wooden box, was the only thing standing between peace and another atomic bomb. Because across the Pacific, in New Mexico and the Marianas, preparations were still moving forward. At Los Alamos, the third plutonium core, identical to the Nagasaki bomb, was ready for transport. Military couriers had orders to deliver it to the 509th Group as soon as authorization came from Washington. Engineers at Tinian Island had already assembled the bomb casing, ready to be fitted. If Japan didn't officially surrender by August 17th, the bomb would be loaded onto a B-29 and dropped. It was no bluff. General Groves sent a message that day to the War Department. The next bomb will be ready for delivery on the 17th or 18th. Further units will become available at approximately 10-day intervals. 10 days. 10 more days, and there would have been a fourth. But while Groves was preparing for another mission, chaos erupted in Tokyo. The rebels stormed through the dark corridors of the imperial palace, shouting for loyalty to the emperor, the same emperor they now sought to control. They searched for the recording of his surrender address, tearing through rooms, smashing cabinets, demanding compliance. Inside a small room, palace guards hid the recording under a pile of pillows and disguised themselves as servants. At dawn, the coup began to crumble. Senior officers refused to join, communications broke down, and when General Shizuichi Tanaka, commander of the Eastern District Army, arrived and confronted the rebels, his words ended the mutiny. "You are all disgracing the emperor you claim to serve. Return to your posts or die where you stand." Hours later, the rebels surrendered. And that same day, August 15th, Emperor Hirohito's voice, faint, trembling, almost divine, reached the people of Japan. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. We have resolved to endure the unendurable and suffer what is unsufferable. For most Japanese citizens, it was the first time they had ever heard his voice. Men wept openly in the streets. Mothers clutched their children. Soldiers, hardened from years of battle, fell to their knees. The war was over. But the order to stop production of the third atomic bomb didn't reach Los Alamos until 2 days later. By then, the core was already sealed in a protective case, labeled and scheduled for shipment. The engineers received the stop message on August 16th, just hours before the truck was to depart for the airfield. One of the scientists, Ramer Schreiber, remembered the moment clearly. "We had it crated and ready. Then word came down, 'The war is over. Don't ship.'" He stood in silence, staring at the gray metal container. Inside it was a sphere of plutonium, smooth and silent, capable of ending another city in seconds. It would never leave New Mexico. For a time, they called it the Orphan Corps. In Washington, Truman received the official surrender at 7 p.m. on August 14th, American time. He walked out to the press and said simply, "This is the day we have been waiting for since Pearl Harbor. This is the day we have won." Crowds flooded Times Square, singing, dancing, kissing strangers. The photographs would become history. But behind that joy, the world didn't know how narrowly it had escaped a third atomic cataclysm. Truman never forgot it. Later that night, in his diary, he wrote, "I have instructed that no more atomic bombs be dropped without my express order. We will not be remembered as the destroyers of mankind." In a single night, the course of history bent away from destruction. By the width of a breath, the whisper of a recording, and one man's decision not to say yes. But the third bomb remained real, locked away, its potential echoing like a warning from the edge of the nuclear age.
Japan's surrender brought silence to a world that had forgotten what peace sounded like. Cities stopped burning, trains halted mid-route, soldiers laid down their rifles and stared into an empty future. But in the deserts of New Mexico, deep within the labs of Los Alamos, the third atomic bomb remained, silent, sealed, and waiting. The scientists who had built it gathered around the crate. Some smiled in relief, others felt only dread. They knew what that weapon meant and what it almost became. Physicist Philip Morrison later said, "We were ready for a third. Everything was in motion. The fact that we didn't drop it wasn't science. It was mercy." The orphan plutonium core was stored away, unshipped and unused. For months it sat inside a vault, a reminder of the power that nearly changed the course of history again. Then came September 1945. As American occupation forces entered Japan, the true scale of the devastation from Hiroshima and Nagasaki became clear. Entire neighborhoods vaporized. Rivers filled with ash and shadows of human forms burned into concrete. Radiation sickness spread like an invisible plague, killing survivors days, weeks, and even years later. In Tokyo, General Douglas MacArthur walked through the ruins and said quietly to his aides, "If there had been a third, there would be no Japan left to occupy." The third bomb would have been dropped somewhere else, possibly Tokyo, Niigata, or Kokura, the city that was actually the intended target for Nagasaki, but was spared by heavy clouds that day. Think about that. If the weather had shifted just slightly, Nagasaki might still stand, and Kokura might have vanished instead. For the people of those cities, survival was a matter of wind direction and chance. Back in the United States, the mood was conflicted. The atomic bomb had ended the war, but it had also begun something far more dangerous. Newspapers hailed it as the weapon that saved 1 million lives, but the scientists who had built it began to question what they had unleashed. Robert Oppenheimer, once the proud director of the Manhattan Project, now looked haunted. When he met President Truman in the fall of 1945, he said, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman snapped back, "The blood is on mine, not yours. Don't ever say that again." But even Truman knew that something irreversible had begun. The atomic age was here, and it would never leave. The United States continued to build new bombs. The Soviet Union raced to catch up. The Cold War was already casting its shadow, and the weapon that nearly destroyed a third Japanese city became the foundation of a global arms race. In Los Alamos, the scientists eventually used the third plutonium core for experiments, testing critical mass, refining designs for future weapons. In 1946, it caused a tragic accident when physicist Louis Slotin mishandled it during an experiment. The core emitted a burst of lethal radiation, fatally irradiating Slotin. He died 9 days later. After that, they called it the Demon Core. The same piece of metal that could have destroyed another city now took the lives of the very men who built it. It was as if the bomb demanded a price, one way or another. By the end of 1945, Japan lay in ruins. Hiroshima and Nagasaki became silent testaments to what the world had created. Survivors, the hibakusha, lived with scars that would never heal. Many wandered through the rubble searching for family who would never be found. One survivor, Shigeko Sasamori, later said, "We did not hate the Americans. We hated war. We hated what it turned us into." While the world celebrated peace, those who had seen the fire firsthand could not. They understood something the rest of humanity was only beginning to learn, that once a weapon like this existed, it could never truly be forgotten. The third atomic bomb was never dropped, but its shadow lingered, in vaults, in nightmares, in the quiet realization that humankind had come within hours of repeating the unimaginable. In the decades that followed, the story of the third atomic bomb became one of history's quietest secrets, whispered about in military archives, mentioned in footnotes, but rarely told to the public. Yet it existed, built, ready, and waiting for an order that, mercifully, never came. When President Truman made the choice not to authorize it, he didn't just end a war. He stopped humanity from crossing a point of no return. For the first time, a world leader had the power to erase a city with a single command and chose restraint. But that decision carried a paradox. By ending World War II with nuclear fire, the United States had opened the door to a new kind of fear, one that no peace treaty could contain. The third bomb symbolized both what humanity was capable of and what it almost became. In post-war Japan, survivors rebuilt from nothing. Children grew up among ruins where nothing could grow, where glass had melted into the soil. And yet, amid that desolation, they began again, planting seeds, reforging lives, finding beauty where horror once reigned. Hiroshima became a city of peace, Nagasaki a city of forgiveness, and together they became voices warning the world of what happens when power outpaces wisdom. Historians later found Truman's handwritten note from August 10, 1945, the day after Nagasaki. In the margin, next to a request for a third atomic strike, he had scribbled a single line, "No more without my express permission." That line may have saved a city, perhaps even saved the conscience of a generation. The plutonium core, once destined to destroy, now rests in memory as a ghost of possibility. It reminds us how thin the line is between survival and destruction, because history is often decided not by the bombs that fall, but by the ones that don't. The third atomic bomb was proof of that. It showed the world that even in an age of total war, mercy could still win. As the years passed, scientists who had worked on the Manhattan Project spent their lives advocating for nuclear control. Oppenheimer himself was stripped of his security clearance, labeled a security risk for opposing further bomb development. But his conscience had already shifted. He understood what most men did not, that real victory comes not from power, but from choosing not to use it. Every time a nuclear crisis threatened the world, from the Cuban Missile Crisis to modern-day tests, the story of the third atomic bomb echoed quietly in the background, as if warning, "Remember how close you came." In the end, the bomb never flew. No city vanished, no siren sounded. And perhaps that's why it matters so much, because it didn't happen. The third atomic bomb stands as a silent monument to the power of hesitation, to the courage of restraint, and to the fragile mercy that saved millions from one more sunrise that could have ended the world. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe, share, and comment, because the untold human stories of World War II deserve to be remembered before time erases their echoes forever.